Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to get started here in just a moment. My computer's saying it's 12:14, so we're going to give it just a few more seconds. I'm very excited to hear what Wes has to say about cyber insurance. So folks are still trickling in. And now my computer tells me it's 12:15, so we're going to start right on time. Really excited to have Wes Spencer from Fifth Wall Solutions. They're cyber insurance specialists, and Wes has a long track record in the cybersecurity industry. So we're going to talk about Cyber Insurance 101, what local businesses need to know, because things are changing, and they're changing really fast. And take it over, Wes.
Great. And thank you for having me. And you had asked me maybe a little bit, a few weeks ago, a month ago to join. And you always know anytime you ask me, I'm happy to join. I love what you're doing at Ekaru and certainly a leader in our space. So thank you for carving some time out for us. And I'm excited to talk to all of you today about what has really become such a hot topic, cyber insurance. So we're going to dive into this. We're going to unpack some things. I'm going to answer any questions that you have. And if you don't mind to be my question Sherpa, I may not see them come across. So just interrupt me
Yeah.
as much as you need. All right. So just a quick piece on me. I'm a cybersecurity nerd at heart that's learning cyber insurance. And so I'm really excited for this. I saw the beginnings of this happen a couple of years ago as threats really began to come down market and small and mid-sized business fell under attack like never before. Cyber insurance is the next evolution of something that really needs to be solved for. So I'm excited about that. I'm definitely an educator at heart and come out of the banking sector, run a YouTube channel. Love for you to check that out if you'd like to. It's I'm hoping we'll hit 100,000 subs here in the next few months, which is exciting. And you can see all the rest of anything you want to know about me there. So definitely connect if you'd like to. And just a bit about Fifth Wall and kind of who we are. I think I just want to make sure you understand who you're talking to here. So Fifth Wall is a wholesaler. And the reason that's important is we work with both agents and we work directly with you with our MSP partners like Ekaru, helping clients solve the cyber insurance burden. So if you're an agent that's listening today, glad you're here. We'd love to talk to you. If you're an individual and you're confused on the process, I'm glad you're here because we're here for you as well. We have pretty much global access. We have over 40 carriers that we work with. So you name the carrier, we know them, we work with them, and we also have our own insurance product coming out as well, which is really exciting. I'm not going to talk too much about that today because it's so new and we just got through all the regulatory hurdles. But just know this is what we do, and the only thing that we do at Fifth Wall is cyber insurance. We don't touch anything else. So we don't do like fire, we don't do hazard, we don't do workers comp, we don't do any of those things. All we do is cyber. It's what we eat, live, breathe, sleep. So that's kind of what we do. So let's just quickly just talk about what's happening in the world around us. I think you probably heard a lot of these things before, but I just want to make sure we're level set, because if we're talking cyber insurance and you're not under attack and you're not a threat, then we're wasting our time here. But one of the things that I have personally seen in my journey at Perch, a company we started helping SMBs in cybersecurity all the way through today, from 2016 to now, I can tell you SMBs are targeted like crazy. I have dealt with many companies, large and small, that have gone through breaches, and they're very significant. So this data comes from some of the best out there. It's from Verizon. Verizon tracks a lot of this data. And these are some of the big things that we see across the board that you just need to know. Social engineering to this day is still a huge threat. You know what I'm talking about. You get a phishing email, you think it's real, it's actually not, and it leads to a huge breach. We know ransomware is a big deal. Today's day and age, the average ransomware cost for small business, and I'm not talking Bank of America, small business, $250,000. And that's not counting all the other costs that get thrown on top, right? So really call it $1 million on average. Vulnerabilities across networks, we see these all the time. And bad guys stealing your data, stealing your credentials, your usernames and passwords, and using that to go after you. So we know this is the landscape that we're faced and stacked up against. And the other thing is, this comes from our friends at Checkpoint, and we see the same thing, that the level and number of attacks are going up. And the reason it's going up is because, think about it this way, the more successful bad guys are, the more it encourages them to pick up their volume, and the more it encourages Me Too's. other people saying, I'm going to do this too, because I know that other people are being successful in these attacks. I'm going to start the same thing. And we know that many of these bad guys are coming out of countries like Russia, Syria, Ukraine, Vietnam, places where their countries just look the other way as long as they're attacking companies in the US. And so you can see this broken down by industry. Pick your industry and just notice. And by the way, we see these things on the insurance side of the house. This is actually very, very, very close to where we see the highest risk industries: education, research, government, those that serve the government. You see a lot of these that are really, really, really picked up. So just wanted you to have an idea of like, you're under attack, you are a target. We're seeing a volume increase, and we're seeing these particular industries are the ones that are really suffering the most in terms of growth of attacks. So let's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wes,
go
I
ahead,
just
Ann.
want to chime in. One of the most common questions that we get from folks is, "Hey, I'm a small business. I'm under the radar, right? Because the big companies, the big events make the national news. The local businesses." I think that's such an important point that you raise, and we hear it almost on a daily basis from people.
I do too. Yep, you're right. I hear the, I'm not a target. No one's coming after me. My data's not worth anything. I'm a nonprofit, right? Like, who's coming after
Yeah.
me? And you'd be shocked. Bad guy, I deal with breaches all the time of companies just like that. I have another talk I do, Ann, that's like a picture of a lighthouse. And I ask everybody, what
Hmm.
do you see in this lighthouse? They're kind of like, oh, it's a dark and brooding day. And then I say, well, you don't have
Yeah.
the rest of the picture. And I show the rest of the picture. It's this massive wave about to just over encompass the lighthouse. And the analogy there is, when I talk to companies that are going through a breach or have been through one of the common things they say is, I had no idea this was about to happen
Hmm.
to me. So you're
Yeah.
right. Like, it's a big, big deal, and you are a target because bad guys have realized: is it easier for me to go after Bank of America's headquarters or small town USA, tiny little bank? We know the answer is, I'd rather make a little less money and go after a small bank where the pickings are easier than try to go
Yeah.
after armed guards and Ocean's 11 style
Yeah.
attack, right? So a great, great comment there. Yeah.
Hmm.
So let's talk about what cyber insurance is for a minute. I think we all know the term. We've heard it. We know about it. It makes sense to us, but I want to make sure we unpack it, because in today's day and age, a breach is much more significant than it was 5 years ago. See, all these things have happened to change the nature and the aftermath of a breach. And in the days of bliss, the old days of yore, as I like to say it, you had a breach, probably no big deal. You just didn't even have to report it. Nobody knew about it. You're good to go. Well, in today's day and age, every single state in the country now have data disclosure laws, and you must report these things by letter of law. And so now you have these things where they have cropped up that you weren't prepared for, like legal kinds of things and fraud response. But there's always been issues around attacks around income loss and credit monitoring and who pays the ransomware and the forensics piece. But regulation has really come into this to make this no joke. Let me give you an example. I live in Tampa. And so Florida has some very defined data disclosure laws where you must report to the attorney general within 30 days. And for every day that you don't, it's $1,000 up to $50,000 on top of other fines. And where I think companies get really lost is, you may be a company today and you're like, well, I have clients in South Carolina and New York and Boston, Massachusetts, and Florida. And all of a sudden now you have all of these individual state laws, and every one of those must be treated in their state. So I'm not saying that to scare you, but just to give you the nature of the reality that today breaches are a much, much, much bigger thing. And so a cyber policy is specifically addressed to deal with all of these ancillary costs, right? And so it's important that we know that, because this is really, it's much different than the old days where you could just say, well, I'll just my general liability will cover a cyber attack. It won't. So keep that in mind. So here's the other problem too. I love this. I created this because I was joking all the time. In the olden days that I mentioned before, 5 years ago and before, it was really easy to get cyber insurance. You'd call up your agent and you'd say, "Hey, I want to get cyber," and like, "Great, no problems. Here's the three things we need to know." And I'm joking a little bit here, but do you have a name? Do you have a business name? Can you fog a mirror? If you can do those three things, you get a policy, right? Was a little bit more than that, but literally it was simple. Anybody could get insurance. I would joke, it's like Oprah up in here, right? You get insurance, you get insurance, you get insurance. And this was the days of bliss. It was really simple. But what happened? Remember how we were talking about all of those big attacks, that like the volume of attacks that are going after small business? This is what happened. And this all happened around circa 2019. And I say circa as if this was like the ancient of days, right? But, you know, a few years ago, we saw volume of attacks going up. And I can personally attest to that. I dealt with many companies that are your size listening today that went through breaches. And we saw it go up because bad guys learned how to crank up the volume, crank up the damages, and go after you like never before. And so what happened is, as these attacks start going up and as insurance is paying out for these attacks, all of a sudden they put themselves in a really poor decision where they realize, you know what, this is not working out for us. We're now paying out for all of these attacks. We didn't think that this was a dangerous industry to write for. Well, they realized not so much, right? So this is the day we're in today, where attacks are going up, demand for insurance is going up, but it's harder and harder and harder to get insurance. And it's also much more expensive than it was before. And you see this. This came out from the Wall Street Journal just last month, or actually maybe even this month. And they're covering this, right? Cyber insurers raise rates amid a surge in costly hacks. And we're not talking just the Bank of America. We're talking about businesses of all sizes across the US, from big cities to small town USA. We are seeing this just blow up. Now, Wall Street Journal is talking about how a lot of this is spillover from Ukraine. I think there's some of that, but I think there's a lot more to it than just this. So just know we're seeing this across, like, this is not just me saying it, we're seeing this across the board. And let's talk a little bit about what the data shows. So I'm going to show you three pieces of data that come from Fitch. Fitch is one of the research companies that rate and track the data around cyber insurance. So look at this right here. This is premium. These are renewal premium rates going up. So every time you had insurance and then you're like, oh, I need to renew for this year, because it's always in 12-month cycles. Look at the meteoric hockey stick growth of the cost of getting insurance for yourself. We have just seen huge growth, especially, remember we said 2019 was when things began to change. Look at this, 2019 early, not too much, but as attacks start to present and come up and the volume goes up, we hit 2020, we hit 2021, and bam, now you're at this position. I was at a conference yesterday in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I asked everybody in the audience, how many of you have renewed insurance lately? And what was the cost difference? And I hear 30, 40, 50% increase across the board. But one person came back and said, I paid about $6,000 last year and I'm paying $50,000 this year just for my insurance. Bigger company, right? But you're seeing this. And so, you know, I don't know, Ann, if you're seeing the same thing on your end of like just your clients coming back saying insurance is just blowing up, but we're seeing that for sure. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions about this, which is why you're here today. But our own insurance rate went way up. I've talked to a lot of people. Some people aren't being able to get the renewals. The other thing is the renewals are coming with a multi-page glossary of terms that folks will like, hey, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? This is definitely the trend, and we're hearing it regularly.
Yeah, good. Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that glossary. Yeah, what you got to do about it for sure. And so I'm glad you said that. And this right here, we're stacking the same premium rates going up, but notice this red line here. This is what's called loss ratios. And if there's one thing insurance carriers care about, it is loss ratio. They're in it for profit, right? They're in it for the money. So they want to pay out as little as possible. So as we saw the 2019, 2020 volume of attacks go up, notice that we saw the loss ratios, how much they're losing, go up as well. So as we see more attacks, we see insurance losing more money, which is why the cost of insurance is going up, because they are losing money hand over fist. And you even see the premiums going up, right? We're seeing this across the board too, where insurance is coming back and they're saying, wait a second, we got to draw some lines in the sand. And so one of the things that we're seeing, this came out earlier this summer, where there's an incident where travelers paid out for a cyber attack for one of their clients. And wouldn't you know it, in the aftermath of this attack, they learned that multi-factor authentication, where you get that other code to your phone or something like that, was not enabled. And the deal is on this one is that the client said that it was enabled. Come to find out, it wasn't. So the client misrepresented, or the more, uncouth term would be they lied. And so in this case, they're coming back, and travelers are saying, we're not paying for this one. We're clawing this money back. We're happy to pay a claim when you do all the things you said you did. But in this case, you didn't. And so we're coming back against this claim. So you're seeing this. The other thing that you're seeing, this is another, I'm just showing you some news articles that are always coming out because I want you to be relevant. The other thing we're seeing is many times, this goes right and to your point, is clients don't often understand their policy. And the policies themselves can feel confusing, and they feel like they have hidden language. The truth is, the language in insurance policy is very, very standardized. You just have to understand, it. And here's an example of a client that unfortunately didn't understand it. Unfortunately, this one also comes from travelers. So I'm not picking on travelers. It's just they got caught in the middle of two worldwide well-known news incidents. And so this one is a computer store, and they had some business email compromise. And I know Ann probably talks to you all about this a lot. This is where a bad guy gets access to your email and they trick you into sending funds to the wrong place. And this happened to this computer store. And wouldn't you know it, they wired out $600,000 to the wrong payee. And by the time they caught it, the money was all gone. So blink of an eye, snap of a finger, $600,000 lost. Well, they made a claim to their insurance. Travelers came back and said, yep, this is a valid claim. We're gonna refund you $100,000. And they said, well, wait a second. We have $1 million in aggregate, and we lost 600,000. You're still owing us 500,000, travelers. Travelers came back and said, no, we're gonna pay 100,000. That's it, because you have something called a sub limit. And a sublimit is a limit of how much particular losses can be paid out. Even though you have $1 million across the board, you have an exception for social engineering losses, which this was for 100,000. The computer store said that can't be right. We're taking you to court over this. So they sued travelers. Within 1 week, the judge threw it out and ruled in favor of travelers. And the comments were, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's black and white, it's cut and dry. You clearly have a limit of 100,000. And so now, unfortunately, this computer store is on the hook for $500,000 of exposure. Now, I say that not to pick on travelers because they didn't do anything wrong. I say that to say you gotta understand your policy and you gotta have a conversation about it. Ann?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. It's getting more and more specific about the sublimits, et cetera. And I think the other thing is business email compromise. Some of these really big stories are over very simple types of attacks. They're not really highly sophisticated things, sort of crimes of opportunity. And whenever we run simulated phishing tests for clients, there's always someone who clicks on the link, like, always.
Yeah.
And that's an important point. Sublimits. Yeah.
Sure is. And I'll show you a sample policy in a minute, and I'll show you those sublimits so you can kind of have an eye on it. But yeah, your job today, your homework today, if you're listening to us, is understand, your own company and your revenue and those things. And you got to make an intelligent decision to say, is $100,000 in social engineering loss, is that good for us? It's probably, for a lot of companies, it's probably way too low. And so unfortunately, this computer store would agree with us. They just didn't know about it. They had never had a conversation about their policy, and they just assumed they had $1 million in coverage no matter what. And so I can't imagine. I feel horrible for them, feeling like going from, that 600 out, that hurts, so I've got insurance, and then finding out 500K of exposure is, ouch, really, really tough. Yeah. So we're in this hard market right now. And a hard market's really simple. It's where basically, from an insurance perspective, when it's harder to get insurance, there's less people wanting to write insurance, and it's more expensive for cyber insurance. When those things happen, we're in a hard market where costs are going up, the unpredictability is going up, and your level and ability to get insurance is going down. That's a hard market. So this is what's led to it, right? Insurance companies are writing for everybody. They realized they made some huge mistakes. They took billions of dollars of loss, and now they're like, well, hold up here. We're going to change the way we're doing this because we got to fix this problem. So we're in a hard market. And The other problem with insurance, and if you've seen this, you know this to be true, it's very knee jerk, right? I'm sitting here, at the distributor level, right? So we're working with carriers every day, and we see this, that the carriers themselves are very knee jerk. In other words, what we see is a carrier A is not always consistent with carrier B. Let me give you an example of this. Maybe you're a CPA firm today and you had XYZ carrier A last year, and you go back to requote, and now this year, the same carrier wants to say to you, hey, your premium rates are going up 5x. You paid 2,000 this time, you're going to pay 10,000 today, this year. And you're like, wait a second, I didn't even make a claim. What's going on? In many cases, that's because that carrier may have had a lot of losses in your particular industry. And so they say your industry is high risk, your costs are going up, even though you didn't do anything wrong. But then you go to carrier B over here, and carrier B is like, no, we haven't seen those kind of losses in your industry. No way, you're not that much of an increase, maybe just 2x. So we're in this stage right now where insurance don't share data with each other very well, and it's very, very reactive. And you even see this in the questionnaires that you get. Sometimes from one year to the next, these questionnaires get longer and more confusing. And so this is what happens in a hard market, and insurance just doesn't yet have the data. And that's a challenge for insurance, because think about how insurance likes to operate. For example, auto. They have great actuary tables. They're big data nerds, right? So they can say if you're this gender, you're this age, you drive this car in this location with this many miles, you cost us exactly this much money. Well, in cyber, they don't have that. It's very, very reactive. And so this is what's causing all this tumultuous challenge. And we're in this age of assume breach. You probably heard that term before. What we mean by that is a breach is going to happen to your organization. It's going to happen to Fifth Wall. It's going to happen to Ekaru. It's going to happen to you. It's not, I wish we were in an age where we could say, well, it's not going to happen to us, but at some point it's going to. And so when it happens, are you ready for this? Because nobody is going to be able to stop a focused bad guy from going after you. I wish we could, but this day and age, the cards are stacked against us. And so it's up to us to think through, well, what are we going to do to reduce those damages and to be able to recover quickly from those damages? That's really what our job is today, is we're talking risk management. We're not talking cyber management. We're not talking IT management. We're talking boardroom level discussions of how do we position our business to survive and thrive for now and into the future. This is a risk management conversation that is really, really important. And so we talk about cyber resilience a lot. Resilience is, I'm not going to read all these words, but resilience is really this. It's how do we as a company stay operational when bad things happen? Because assume breach mentality is not a defeatist mentality. It's the realist mentality of it's going to happen to us. We're going to click on that phishing email. We're going to visit that website. Something bad's going to happen. How do we still stay operational to where we don't wire out $600,000 and have $500,000 of exposure and just sets our company back years? How do we survive and thrive? So this is what we're talking about today. And it takes a larger conversation. This is why Ekaru is here for you. I'm not going to talk about all these things, but Ann and team know every piece of this. And their job for you is to help you manage that risk across the spectrum of your IT presence. And so they're going to help you doing all of these things to reduce the chance of attack happening, to reduce the blast radius if something bad happens. But ultimately, when something happens, you get to these later phases here of all these things we got to do. And this is where insurance picks up the rest. So cyber insurance is happy to say, look, we're here to be your stopgap. You're paying us for it. We're doing it in the aggregate, but we need to make sure all this other stuff you're doing, you've got the right things in place. And if you're doing those things, then you become an acceptable risk to us, and we will enter into that last phase of if something finally happens, we'll help you with the rest. That's kind of what we're talking about here. And what I want to do is I want to give you some examples, because I think examples are really, really helpful, because a lot of times I talk to clients and they just don't fully understand the ways that this could impact their company. That's totally fair. So let's address some of those ways for a minute. Here's one at the top. This is an interesting one, right? So in this case, one of your employees at your company accidentally transfers something. They had some kind of malware on their computer, or they had a malicious invoice of some kind that they forwarded on, something like that, and it causes your clients to be impacted. And so in this case, the client of your client comes after you and says, you sent us this malware, this nasty thing, and it cost us $3 million. And the reason I put 3 million is because that happened. This was an exact example. It cost them a lot of money. Because keep in mind, for a lot of small business, you know this, you may work, one of your clients may be somebody much bigger than you. And so the damages and loss that they had, they're coming after you for some of that because it entered in from you, right? And so that's an example of something. And a lot of times clients hear that like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I didn't realize that we could be the source of an attack by our mistakes, right? Maybe an email you get. In this case, it came from a long-standing vendor relationship. And it said something like, hey, we need to change this email for the wire instructions for the next month's bill. And you're like, oh, okay, that seems to make sense. You didn't check it. And all of a sudden that money goes out. That's called fraud, wire fraud. Usually it happens from what we talked about before, business email compromise. So that's an example. And you see this last one, hacker gains access to, an employee of your firm, you're an accounting firm. They use that address to do some nasty things, and you're the center point for it all, right? So notice that none of these are like, Ocean's 11 style or like movie style hacks. These are all like just course of business. And so these are things you really want to be prepared for. And a couple other things I wanted to share as well is even thinking about, some reputational damage. That's one of the things that a lot of clients aren't prepared for is, whoa, we lost business because someone said, I was hacked by your misdeeds. I'm done with this, right? Or they go and they spread, on Facebook or whatever it may be that causes that, or business disruption. A lot of clients are not prepared for ransomware attacks. The average outage time for ransomware is 16 days. So let's say that you didn't pay the ransom. Good on you. But if you did, it's $250,000 just for the payment of the ransom. But then take 16 days of outage time. So slash your monthly revenue in half. So these are all things that cyber insurance is geared towards to step in and help you address from a risk management perspective, all of these kinds of scenarios. All right, so take a breath, stand with me here. All is not lost. There's a lot of hope, and I want to talk about some of those things. Let's talk about what happens in a breach. This is a high level. There's much more to it than this, but companies that have gone through a breach can attest there's a lot of things that happens, right? One of the things that happens in a breach is the very first thing that you need is legal counsel. And what you don't necessarily want is like your local business attorney, right? Your business attorney is great for advising in business matters, things like that. But when it comes to a breach, we're talking about state regulations, in some cases national, you're talking about potential crime, even federal crime. All of a sudden, this is a different category. And so you need legal counsel that is specialized in cyber law. A lot of times we call these breach coaches. So a breach coach by term is an attorney that specializes in cybersecurity. And so they're gonna be your quarterback in the incident, right? The good thing about a breach coach is all they do is deal with breaches. So they go to sleep at night, they wake up, drink their coffee, they're dealing with breaches. They finish the day, they go into the next day, they deal with breaches, right? That's what they do. And they're not emotionally attached to the breach like you are, because this breach is your breach, right? So you're worried, you're panicked, you're scared, people are angry. Not your breach coach. They're your quarterback. They're helping you deal with this. They don't have any emotional turmoil, so they're going to think clearly. Not going to say that, do this, those they'll tell you you're not. People can wait, and they become this godsend. Listen to this is crazy. In 100% of breaches I've dealt with, where clients have had a breach coach, 100% of them say, I could not have made it without my breach coach, because they're there to help me through all of this, and they've done it 1,000 times. They're going to kick off forensics. Forensics are where we send people in that look through the machines to understand what happened, when did it happen, how did it happen, what was the scope of damages. They do these things because legally they must. Legally, they need to understand who all was impacted, because a lot of state regulations say if you can't prove impacted and non-impacted clients, you have to treat everybody as impacted. And that's where the costs just blow up. So what will happen is insurance will actually assign for you a breach coach. Or if you already have a breach coach, as long as you've talked to the insurance company, they'll reimburse that breach coach, because everybody's aligned in this. The insurance wants a breach coach to keep you protected and keep your costs down. You want a breach coach to help you respond quickly, keep your costs down. So they'll kick off all these things that you see here and work with you throughout that breach to get you back to restored order. So hope that kind of makes sense of like what happens in a breach. And I want to show you an example policy. This is not your policy, right? I'm not quoting you today. So I'm just showing you a sample policy. So you can see this one has $1 million of aggregate limit, like we talked about before. And you can see all these things that are in here, right? And you may have questions about like, well, what goes into public relations expense, right? If you have questions about a policy, that's why we're here at Fifth Wall. We will help you and explain these are very well-defined terms. They're not willy-nilly, they're not abstract, they're very well-defined. So we can go through and kind of help you on what each of these are. But there's a lot of pieces that you see here, things like business interruption recovery costs, extortion loss, right, to paying the ransom. So a lot of these things exist here. And then you see these ones in red at the bottom. This is what Ann and I were talking about before. These are the sublimits. So in this one, we have 3 major sublimits. Electronic theft and telecommunications theft are becoming a little less common, but social engineering, these 3 are always here as sublimits. And this is where you really want to have that conversation with your provider, your insurance carrier, and understand, is that right for us? Should we raise those sublimits? And what should we get those up to? And your carrier or your distributor will have some creative ways we can help you get that up. So in many cases, I would say for most businesses, $250,000 for social engineering is typically not enough. I'm not saying that for you specifically, but just across the board, it's usually not enough. So I'm just showing you an example of a policy. And here's a huge takeaway. If you've been like working and answering some emails while you're listening to this, pause for a minute and listen to this piece because it's big. Unfortunately, I see a lot of clients that have an insurance sort of, I call almost like a tag on, right? So they have a general liability policy and they go to their agent and they say, hey, I'm worried about cyber insurance. And the agent, it's not that the agent's doing anything wrong. They just don't understand the nature of cybersecurity. Some agents don't realize how damaging an attack can be. So they're like, okay, well, we'll just put an endorsement for cybersecurity onto your general liability policy. And it's always got a limit of 100K or lower. And if you have that, you need to change that because it's not enough. I'm just telling you, it is not enough. It won't even pay for half the cost of a ransom attack, let alone all these other things we talked about. So you need a standalone insurance policy. All carriers offer them. They start at $1 million. They're designed to pay claims, and they have all of these things baked into them. So that's a huge takeaway, is go find out where you're at today. And if you just have an endorsement on your cyber liability, you got to get that changed. You absolutely got to get it. So that brings up this question. How do I get a standalone policy, right? Now, remember, we said in the age of Oprah, you just got one if you asked for it. This is really simple, $1,000, roughly, and off you go. Well, today it's both more expensive and more difficult to get it, but it's not too difficult. Here are the 5 things that you need to have in place to be eligible for cybersecurity. We all have been to the theme parks, the Disneys of the world, and your kid lines up and like, yeah, I'm gonna ride the ride, and how sad they are when they don't quite hit the green line. Let's not be that. So there are 5 things. Now, these are not the only 5 things for now and into the future, but currently, because Fifth Wall, we work with all the carriers pretty much, we see all the things they've required. So we took all of that and we boiled it down, and all of them pretty much agree. These are the 5 things you have to have in place. And I'm not going to go through the specifics of each one, but just know Ekaru can do every one of these. If you're not working with them and you don't have one of these things in place, they can put them in place. They will get all this stuff going. So multi-factor, you have the code, backups. You need to have just not storing backups, but good backups where they're segregated, they're off the network, where no one can access those backups and delete them. Those are the kind of things we need. We need this thing called EDR, endpoint detection and response. And the quickest way I can explain that is, how you have a home alarm system in your network, in your home, and it tells you if like weird signs are happening. We saw a window open, that sort of thing. EDR is doing the same thing for your network. It's hunting through the activity. So you need to have EDR in place. You've got to be doing patching and vulnerability management. Insurance companies are putting a line in the sand saying, if you get hacked by something that's like 30 days old and it's been disclosed and you didn't take care of it, probably not going to pay for it, right? So they're starting to get hard line on these things. And then, Ann, you mentioned this one earlier, cybersecurity employee training, the awareness training. You've got to go through those things. And so Ann can do these things for you. The entire Ekaru team, this is what they do. And I just wanted to ask you, does this all make sense? Any thoughts you have around these components here? Any questions that you have around these things? Because these are the things that your clients have got to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one on this list is probably the easiest one to do, the cybersecurity employee training. A lot of times it's tough to convince, we'll roll out a platform for folks, it's a couple of minutes of training a week. The Massachusetts data security law has specifically required this for 12 years.
Wow.
And yet it's still hard to get people to do this. And it's front and center. So, a lot of these things, I had another client, we do a newsletter every week, and one of my clients came to me once, like, stop talking about patching, it's so boring. Well, you have to do it. So yeah, this is, we've had a lot of conversations over many, many years about all of these things, but now the insurance, as you pointed out, the insurance companies are saying, you got to do this and show us.
Yep. Sure is boring.
Yeah.
Some of these things can be, but
Yes.
so are filling out my quarterly reports, sure boring, but boy, I'm required to do it. So,
yeah. I mean, I love all this stuff, but yeah,
yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
It's getting pretty specific.
It sure is. So there you have it. Those are the 5 things, and there's more that needs to be done to do good security, right? But these are the minimum 5. So if you're not doing these things, your next step is to reach out to Ann and Nancy and say, let's get a conversation started. I can't tell you how many times I join a call with a client and they get denied coverage for cyber insurance. And they say, well, what happened? And I'm taking a look and I'm like, well, this is why you don't have this. You're not doing that. You're not doing that. I talked to one car dealership. They were like 200 million in revenue, and they were notoriously stingy from what the IT provider was telling me. They failed the ransomware coverage. And the CEO of the car dealership is on with me. And I hate to say it, but I'm kind of calling his baby ugly, right? I'm letting him know just how deficient he is.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he goes, so do you think we can get like a 30-day extension? We're committed to fixing this. I said, no, carriers are not going to do that. It's far too much risk. He goes, okay, thought you'd say that. He goes, but I'll tell you what, this is mission 1 for us. Priority 1, we will get this course corrected. And sure enough, they did. And not only did they get it course corrected, their original policy they had a quote for was $30,000 for the year. We found one for $15,000. So they saved a lot of money, and a lot of it for them to like add in these 5 things cost them about $5,000 to $7,000 for the year. And so the car dealer came back, the CEO was like, why didn't someone tell me this? Like, I actually save money on my policy by putting these things in place. I wish I had known, right? So it really just was a really cool success story to get these things in place.
Yeah, and another thing you had mentioned in a previous conversation is when you're up for renewal, start looking at this 60, 90 days in advance, because there may be some really easy things to put in place that are going to make a big difference. But you can't wait till the last minute.
You read my mind. Look at right here. So
that's
exactly
there
right.
It is. Okay.
So some takeaways. No, but you're right, Ann. That's exactly right. First of all, read your policy and understand it. If you don't understand it, reach out. We'll help you at Fifth Wall. We'll help you understand the policy, whether it's one that we helped you with or not. I don't care. I want to make sure you know your policy. And then Ann is super duper right. Get in front of this 60 days in advance. Find out when your renewal window comes up and get in front of it, because Ann is right. You don't want these things to sneak up on you. Sometimes you're just not ready for the changes, and it's going to take you 30 days to get those things going. So you need to get in front of this ahead of time, and that's one of the best things that you can do. You need to understand your sublimits. We talked about sublimits and how much of an issue they are because of loss capability. So you need to be ready for that. You need to find that breach coach. If you don't know how to do that, so what we'll do at Fifth Wall, we'll help you. We know a number of them that are really good, and it doesn't cost you anything to start the conversation with them. It's great to have them in your back pocket ready to go. Mm-hmm. And then quickly, a few things. I want to save some time for questions. Where the future of this is going. So a few different things. One, data is king. Remember how we said the insurance companies, like carrier A might be super expensive and you go talk to carrier B or C? This is why we have 40 that we work with. We're going to help you find the best one, because they don't have the data yet, but they will at some point. And data is king. Data will drive everything. The data of your industry, of your revenue, of your previous loss history, of the controls you have in place. All of these things will eventually stabilize, but we're not there yet. And so because of that, you really got to keep your options open and talk to a lot of different carriers. Now, another thing is limits. On average, I can't tell you today what your aggregate limit should be. it depends on your revenue, your industry, we can have a conversation to help you figure that out. But generally speaking, if you're going for limits of 3 million or down, it's not that difficult to get a policy. When you have to go above 3 million, all of a sudden it gets really difficult. So just know that we'll help you. We've helped clients get, tens of millions, 20s of millions for coverage, but it's much more difficult to do that. So just know that it's a little difficult. And then also know that there's a lot of discussion in the industry right now around acts of war. This is all kicked up because of the Ukraine conflict. And so, what does that look like in terms of, if there were an actual cyber war? I don't think you have to worry about that quite yet, but just know there's discussion. Just know that the insurance carriers are starting to think about, well, what would be an act of war and what wouldn't be, and what would we cover and not cover? We're at the very beginnings of these conversations, but just know that's on the cusp in the future. And I'm going to leave you with these things. A lot of this we've talked about. I just want to summarize some things so you can kind of redigest. I'm a big fan of that, right? So we know the quantity and the costs are going up. You've got to have a plan for this. Part of that plan is, how do we mitigate with cyber insurance? We know that cyber insurance is that key to controlling the cost, to keeping them down, and having the breach coach and all these kinds of things to help you work through it, and the reimbursement of these costs. We also know that not all policies are equal. So reach out. Fifth Wall is here to help you find the right policy for you. You should get in front of this in advance. You should understand that the carriers themselves, the more they're paying out, the more they're going to stiffen their minimum standards. So we talked about the 5 minimum standards. You may see more come in. And then if you don't meet those controls, you may not be able to get coverage, and you may not even have a claim. Now, you will have a claim, and you'll get a claim if you have the things that you attest to, if you're doing them. The big key is don't lie on the questionnaire. If you have a question, reach out on the question. Right? But do what you say you're doing, and you'll be able to make those claims, right? And so, Ann, I want to kind of finish this on some next steps and then answer any questions. I know we got about 5 minutes for questions. Don't assume things. Find out where you're at. And so one of the things we'd love for you to do is, if you want to have this conversation, it's completely free. There's no obligation. There's never obligation. If you want to reach out, just reach out to Nancy, to Ann. And what we'll do is we'll jump in with you on a quick 15-minute conversation. If you have a policy, provide it early to us, and we'll take a peek at it. If you don't have a policy and you're curious what that looks like, we'll do that. If you've got a policy and just doesn't make sense to you, we'll help you. We're here to help you. We would love to do it completely for free and help you find the policy that's right for you. And thoughts, questions?
Yeah, well, that was great. I took so many notes. So it's always a pleasure to hear you speak, Wes. And for folks, if you're already working with a group that you know well, they can work with Fifth Wall on the back end, so it doesn't replace anything that you're currently doing. And we have a few insurance companies within our Ekaru community as well that they can work with you as well. So
Yep,
we just get so many questions about insurance all the time, and Ekaru's not an insurance agency. We're really passionate about helping SMBs with cybersecurity. I really like what you said about the resilience, because so much of cyber news is gloom and doom and danger. And this is really about just looking at the facts and then getting the right things in place at the right costs that are going to help a business. Because, assume the breach, it's going to happen, but this is going to get you to the other side. And of the things that I've seen in the local community, I love what you said about the impartial breach coach who just does this, because the emotions, it's just a really scary event. A question about MFA. You talked about some of the questions on the questionnaires that we've seen are kind of generic. Do you use MFA? Well, what happens if you have MFA, say 365 has MFA, but you don't have MFA like every single place? Have you seen insurance companies, when claims are applied, like, are they looking to kind of trip you up? Well, the breach happened here, but we noticed you didn't have MFA on this other thing, and we're not covering you. How does that play out?
So it's usually not that the carrier is trying to trip you up. I know there's, to your point, there's a lot of sometimes concern about that. Usually it's the carrier doesn't always do the best job asking the question. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes we see an insurance questionnaire that will say something like, do you have multi-factor authentication rolled out for all your users and for all your devices, including your routers and your switches and all that kind of stuff? And you come back and you're like, well, that doesn't exist. That's literally impossible. My switches and routers don't support that. So in a case like that, what you do is, when you're reading through your questionnaire, if you have any question about it, any concern, the best thing to do is usually at the very bottom, they have a notes field, or if they don't, just attach a second page and disclose those things. So once you go in and you say, we put yes for that question, but our routers that we use don't support multi-factor, we're just disclosing that to you, you're solid gold. Because now
Yeah.
you've disclosed it and it's clear. And when the insurance company binds with you and says, cool, we're going to accept that, you have the documentation to say, we disclosed that. It was well known. They chose to bind. So the goal is, if there's confusion, disclose. And that will take you a really long
Yeah.
way. And in those rare cases where you need someone to be that advocate and call the carrier up and say, hey, here's what's going on and here's why, that's what we do at Fifth Wall. So we'll do that. We'll help you document the whole process and you'll have coverage.
Yeah, this is really great, and that's why we partnered up with Fifth Wall, because we get a lot of questions, and we want to make sure, managing risk that you talked about, because sometimes we'll sometimes we talk to so many different people, but sometimes they'll say, oh, we don't need to implement all these cyber controls because we have insurance, and they're not really, like, you're not going to have insurance. What do you see for percent of folks who actually can't get a renewal? Is that rising? What's happening in that area?
If, it's starting to pick up, but the good news is, because we're doing such a good job of like really illustrating those big five that you need to have in place and some of the others that are there.
Yeah.
This is why we love IT providers like Ekaru, because you provide that critical piece that, I'm just going to be honest, most small business can never do those five things without you. And so because we usually work so closely with our MSP friends that help provide those solutions, you're going to be the ones to say, yep, I can just tell you ahead of time, they're good to go, right? Like, you're not the
Mhm.
one that proves them, right? But you're just going to say the control piece, that's what we're here for. So that's really what
Yeah.
helps it, is when we're going through an IT provider, that'll happen. In the case where we talk to a small business who's been doing it on their own, very high chance they're not going to make it today. And so
Okay.
we'll refer them over and we'll say, hey, local to you is, you go call up Ekaru. They're going to help you fix all this. You're going to have to commit a little
Okay.
to it. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's really what helps offset that.
All right. Thank you for that. It's 1 o'clock. I know folks need to get back to their work. I want to just thank you so much for joining us today, Wes. I took a
Very
ton of
welcome.
notes. I learned a lot, and this is also recorded, so I know I'll be going back to look at it, and I hope folks in our community will draw on this, because there's so many things you can do ahead of time that are smart and affordable to be better protected when things happen. And just to folks, Nancy really wanted to be here today, but she had a family emergency come up. She's okay, but she's really here. I really appreciate all the outreach that she's done to get this message out to our community. So thank you, Wes.
Very welcome. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.